I'm Sasha Nicole.
And I'm Star.
And I'm Dr. T.
And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things Black mental health. And we have a special show today. But before we get into that, we all need to make sure we tell Star happy birthday.
It's your birthday, big son.
You know, she's extremely excited because she hit the over 40 mark and she looked good, y'all, don't she?
That's right.
41 years young. Yes, ma'am.
All right, Star. So tell us what we're talking about today. And I'm going to intro the guests and we're going to have a great conversation as usual.
Okay, so today we got a little bit of a twist because we did a show. We did a LGBTQ show for Pride, LGBTQ plus show for Pride Month. So today we're going to talk about transgender and advocacy because we know our transgender community has a lot of things going on, and we got to take care of each other. So let's get into it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Absolutely. So we have an incredible guest today, Mr. Tiq Milan. Tiq Milan has been an advocate in the LGBT plus community for over a decade. He is also a writer and consultant who carved a niche for himself as a media advocate and one of the leading voice for transgender equality. He writes about pop culture, inclusive leadership, transgender rights and equity, and has been, as I mentioned, a journalist for over the decade and appeared on BuzzFeed, NBC, and CNN, among others. So Mr. Milan, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you and to have this conversation. As Star mentioned, you know, for a lot of us, this conversation is important because when we talk about advocacy and when we talk about Black people in general, oftentimes we tend to exclude certain members of that community. And so part of this conversation was to encompass how do we make sure that, one, we're having the appropriate conversations, that we're continuing to represent that it's not just specific Black lives that matter, but all of us that matter in this fight for equity and justice. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about all of the work that you've been doing and just, you know, as we start off with this conversation.
Sure. Okay, so that's a big question. But let me start with this. Okay, so you just had a birthday. My birthday is on Tuesday, and I'll be 40, but I forfeited this year, so I'm really just gonna be 39 because it's 2020 and I'm not.
Because you got to do a do-over for COVID, right? Is that it?
I'm getting a do-over, so I'll be turning 40 next year. But I do have a birthday coming up, so shout out to my fellow Cancer up in here. Yeah, Cancer season. So how to be more inclusive? I think, you know, what we're doing right now is part of it. I think making sure that if you are in a position of leadership or decision making or in a position of innovation, that you are inviting trans Black folks into the room and having their voices be heard, so that we can start to understand that the experience of being Black in this country is not a monolithic one. You know, so I am Black and I'm trans and I'm queer and I'm also a father and I'm also a professional. I'm also all of these things. And when I come into a room, I bring all of those with me. And I think oftentimes what I've experienced, and I know what other like queers and LGBT Black folks have experienced, is within Black community, people asking us just to bring a piece of ourselves with us, or, you know, to place value, like you have to be Black first or a man first or trans. I'm not. I'm layers of those things. I'm not pieces of those. Those are layers of my existence, and they inform and also fortify my Blackness. You know, so I think just having a place of empathy and awareness of other people's lived experience, and not expecting people to place a value against one part of their identity and the other, and also understanding, I think, that other people's truths don't have to necessarily invalidate your own, but they do complicate your own, and be in a space where you're ready to be complicated. Right? And I think when we do those things, that's when real allyship shows up.
How is the trans experience different being Black? You know, like, I mean, I got an idea of it because everything is harder, but more, you know, it's harder and better being Black. I'm just saying it. You know, but like, how does it differ? Because like, I remember hearing something about, Caitlyn Jenner, and just being like, she's right-wing Republican, but yet she's gone through this transformative experience, and it's like, how is it different?
Well, see, because that whole thing with Caitlyn Jenner, because the whole thing with like right-wing Republicans and their whole platform right now is just white supremacy. So just because she's trans doesn't mean she's not a white supremacist. It doesn't have like a white supremacist kind of like subconscious kind of thing, like that kind of like is the undercurrent of her decision making and how she is in the world. So, you know, Caitlyn's Caitlyn. you know. But I think for me, it was a question with how's the trans experience different from the Black experience?
Like, how is it different? How is it? I mean, I presume it's different just because of, like, you talk about the layers, but like, how is your experience being a trans man, like, differed versus like maybe your trans male, you know, your trans male, white male friends?
Well, I'll tell you that. I'll tell you this. Just, you know, I'm from Buffalo, New York. I'm from the Rust Belt, from a really middle class kind of family. My mother was a nurse. God rest her soul. My father is a mechanic. You know, grew up Seventh-day Adventist. I came out as gay when I was 14. You know, everyone was like, oh, okay, well, you know, Tiq always did look like a little boy. So I guess, little tomboy, you know. I came out as trans in my 20s, and, you know, people were kind of shocked, but they got with it. You know, I did not come from a Black family where I was mistreated or isolated or any of those things. My mother rode for me to her last breath. My father, you know, we got, you know, we, like, my whole family, everybody's, it's been so long, it's nothing. It's nothing. Nieces and nephews, like, it's nothing. So I have that, and that's a part of my Black experience. You know what I'm saying? I think, you know, it's not an either or, it's an and in both.
Okay.
You know, so, you know, I come from a very Black family and dealing with the same thing that Black people are dealing with. So dealing with, you know, generational poverty, dealing with, like, systemic illnesses. You know, my mother died of cancer, my grandmother died of cancer, my auntie died of cancer, you know, so cancer that runs rampant within, like, working class and middle class communities. You know, I have to experience that as a Black trans man in Black community with a Black family. You know, I have a Black child as a, you know, as a husband or an ex-husband and father, you know, and what that means and navigating these spaces, you know, all while being trans. Now, but the thing is with me and my transness is that people don't read me as trans. People don't read me as queer. No one would ever know that I identified as a queer person or that I was transgender unless I told them. So because of that, that gives me some autonomy there, you know? But I think that what my transgender experience has done for me and for my Black family is they've seen how I live my truth and they are more open to their own truths, right? Because they're like, you know, we know Tiq and we knew Tiq before he was Tiq and we love him and we've seen him grow and be successful. Just by living his truth, why can't I live my truth? And still be promised everything that, you know, God has promised us. You know what I'm saying? So I think that my trans experience has influenced the Black experience of the people around me. It's complicated it, and I think has made it more valuable.
I like, and I think what you're saying is very important because oftentimes when we touch on these topics, it's a very awkwardness, like we're afraid to say the wrong thing. We're afraid to, you know, as you mentioned with your family embracing you, you know, the narrative is oftentimes that the Black family doesn't embrace this. And I know that oftentimes that does happen. But when we think of, you know, even in our own selves, how do we approach these conversations, you know, without, is there a fear that something should be offensive? Is there a proper way to address certain things? Like, or is it normal to say, hey, I'm not sure, can you tell me? What are those ways when you enter that space to make sure that you're, one, being informative, but two, being accepting? Because sometimes it's, you don't know how you feel about it, or you're not sure, you know, and even when, and beyond that, and I know there's a loaded question, but then even after that, as you felt like, you know, I feel like I resonate as a man, can you explain also too that transition, whereas people are not able to understand what that's like?
How to explain my transition to people who don't understand what it's like?
I say, and let me be clear when I say that, explaining the transition in the sense of when people say, you know, when you think of the conservativeness of, well, then no, that's wrong, or no, that's a mental illness, you know, those type of things.
Yeah, I have no time for any of that foolishness. That's just silly. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really even, like, if people are that far off the deep end where they think that somebody trans is like mentally ill or that like God's gonna strike us down, I don't even have like the bandwidth to even hold space for people like that. You know, but I will say this about the trans experience. You know, it's complicated. You know what I'm saying? It's complicated in that I think that people think that there's often this misconception that transgender people, that we're like trying to deceive people, or like we're trying to be something that we're not. Like people see me and think, oh, I'm trying to be a cis man, a cisgender man, or a non-transgender man, right? I'm not. I'm just trying to be me. This is just my gender. My gender is not your gender. I don't want to be a cis person at all. I'm a trans person. Like, you know, this is my gender. So the complication is that it gets really hard for people to understand that transgender people exist when they can only look at gender as either this or that. Okay? And the experience of gender is a spectrum of possibility. Yeah. Binary systems don't work. They don't work when we talk about gender. They don't work when we talk about our politics. Binary systems don't work in space and time. Binaries don't work. It's always a spectrum. It's always fluid.
Oh, that's deep. Say that one more time. Binary systems. What is it?
Binary systems don't work in our gender. They don't work in politics. They don't exist. They don't work in space and time. Everything has to be fluid. It's a fluid motion in life. Okay.
I think, Tiq, one of the things that is really important that you're saying right now is that as a society, we are just starting to come to the realization that binary systems don't work in all the places that you talked about, right? So I think one of the challenges of figuring out how to invite conversations is that we didn't even know we were supposed to be having these conversations. And so it sounds like you came from a very open and engaging and welcoming families, but a lot of families are awkward and uncomfortable. And even though they love and accept their child, whatever gender or whatever, they don't know how to approach it. I just saw a conversation between a father and a son, and the son was a social media star, and he wanted to have on camera the conversation with his dad that he was gay and queer. And he's like, Dad, I think you know this, but we've never ever had the conversation. And the young man was like 25 years old. And his dad was like, yeah, I just love you for who you are, blah, 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 blah. But they had never actually had a conversation. Yeah. And this was a very open and affirming, and loving and engaging family. And they hadn't had the conversation. Right. So how do we help families that are less than that try to, I really like what you said, invite trans voices in, but we don't even know how to identify the voices and make sure that we're making space for them.
Right. So I think when it comes in the context of a family, this is one thing that I learned from my mother, who was really, there for me since the beginning, is that when you say you love someone, there is no but after that. Mm-hmm. All right. So grounding yourself in that truth, like, I love this child and that's it. Mm-hmm. Not but.
If you dating them and you like, I love you, but you can't say but.
I mean, if you dating them, that's different. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, like, I feel like if it's your child or your sibling or, your family,
I was just thinking that. I was like, I loved a few people, but.
No, I'm saying like your family. And I don't mean family like necessarily has to be like blood relation, like those who you choose to call your family. So if somebody is your family, right? And like particularly like thinking about relationships between parents and their children. You are a parent of a queer or a trans or a gay child. Once you say that you love that child, there is no but after that. So grounding yourself in that truth. Mm-hmm. And also, I think another thing that parents have to do is let go of the fact you brought this child into this world, but this child is not yours. They are theirs. Mm-hmm. Right? So whatever kind of like fantasy you had about walking somebody down the aisle, or somebody being a football player, whatever you thought, okay, I don't want to cuss, whatever you thought, let that go. Yeah. Right? And really be in love with their process of them becoming themselves. It's like, I think sometimes parents can be so selfish because that's what it is. Either if it's like religion, that's like getting in the way of them really being able to be there for their child, or the selfishness when they are centering the narrative that they had, the vision that they had for their kid, instead of really centering the vision that this child has for themselves. Yeah. And I think like fundamentally, like that has to happen. Yeah. And then once that happens, everything will fall into place.
I mean, that's so true. We talk about in a variety of ways when a parent has to grieve, and people get funny about that word, but a parent has to grieve letting go of their own beliefs, values, expectations, dreams, fantasies. Even
even their relationship with their child. Like when I transitioned, it's like I went from being a daughter to a son, mm-hmm. from an auntie to an uncle, from the little sister to the baby brother. So everybody had to transition with me. And I didn't have a bad relationship to the woman and the girl that I used to be. I just evolved away from her. So for me, there was a grieving process. So how long is it for me not to give my family space to have that grief as well? I remember once I had my top surgery, my mother was there for me, and we went to the hotel afterwards and we were talking, and she started crying. She looked at me and she said, it feels like my daughter died. Mm. Like there was a grief there because I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm your son.
Mm-hmm.
And the complexity of like understanding this new person, but still knowing that all the love that we had prior to this is still real and it's still relevant. I had to have the same conversation with my father. It was like, well, what do we do with who we were? Like who we were influences who we are. Mm-hmm. Like the love is here. Like, you know what I'm saying? So like I had to have those hard conversations, and I think that we have to give people that space, but also like give people boundaries as well. So
how do we support people? Like is there a mental health like aspect to this, like a support? Because I can't imagine. I had a lady when I first started working, no BS, like before I really knew what trans was or whatever, a Black lady who worked with me down in Louisville, Kentucky, at GE. And one day she was like, I don't know the right term, but she was a lesbian and like, dressed manly. I don't want to try.
Little butch.
You know what I'm saying? I'm learning. So it was like, oh, okay. And there wasn't a lot of us there. So, we was cool, because there wasn't 15 of us in the whole plant. And I was like, and then one day it was like, oh, we got to have a meet with everybody that worked with her to tell us, like, basically she had transitioned or she was starting her transition, and like HR had this big meeting and like things we couldn't say, do, whatever. And then she came back the next, like, I feel like it was like 2 weeks later, looked, honestly the same. And it was so, and we was all like, like, it was so crazy because her name was like Erica, but then, but like, I can't imagine going through that. And like, literally, it was just like, hey.
Okay. But here's the thing. So this person.
I'm being honest.
I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate it. That's why I'm here. So this person goes through a transition. Everybody's okay. So the transition isn't a monolith, right? It looks different for everybody. You have people who identify as trans who don't take any hormones. I clearly hormone down. You know what I'm saying? There are some trans people who don't, but they're still trans and you still respect their pronouns. And that's just it. It don't matter what you think you see. Okay? This person says, my name is Erica, now my name is Eric, and my pronouns are he, him. Okay, Eric, he. Like, that's it.
It took a year, like literally, and she eventually left, but it was like, or he eventually left, but it was literally like, and like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. How do Dr. T weigh in here? How do we get ourselves together? Like, I want to be together. How do I get myself together to deal with that?
Can I just say, I think it's just overcomplicating something that's really simple. Right? So someone says, these are my pronouns, this is my name, use their pronouns, use their name, and then you engage with them in conversation the way you would any other human being. If you wouldn't ask any other human being about their genitals, don't ask them about theirs. If you wouldn't ask anybody else about what medications they take, what surgery they had, the trauma in their childhood, don't ask this person these questions.
See, Sasha and I would do that.
And just talk to them like you would anybody, any other coworker, any other homie, any other friend.
I'm that friend and coworker who asks those questions, but out of love, not out of offensiveness, out of curiosity. But you said a point that I was thinking when when he was describing what happened at GE is that I think people have a hard time accepting the choice of someone else. And then when you think of like that from across the board, like even if you took trans away and thought about it in a relationship, as you mentioned with your child, like, and Dr. T and weigh in on that, it's like we cannot fathom the idea of which we don't understand. So it's like if Erica came and said, well, no, now call me Eric, it's like, but why? It's like we can't own the fact of someone else's choice, even when you think about politics and the laws that are trying to be mandated so that you can't or can do certain things because they cannot accept that even with gay marriage, that this is a choice of someone else that has nothing to do with you.
Well, and I would say it's not a choice, but it's them finally deciding to live in their truth. And what happens is they have worked through it a long time in their head, with their family. And then when they finally come out to the rest of the world, it's brand new to us. So that's why it's a challenge for us and not them. And that's why I think, Tiq, when you say it's overcomplicated, because if you have worked through all of that and you have decided that you are ready to live your truth and you're ready to present yourself in your most authentic form, but everybody else is not prepared or hasn't thought about it, then that's where the friction comes in, because people, it is hard for people to look at one thing that they have known to be true. There's lots of psychological tests about this. If you look at a rock and you put up the word horse, people are going to say rock, no matter how many times you put up the word horse, right? Because our brains are designed to do that. So it does take people time, but you have to be open and willing and honest to be able to go through that process with them, if you care enough about that person and want to be a part of their lives.
Right.
Can I just say something though? Like T, the way you explain it to us and the way you're like, okay, you're patient with us and not like, no, and I understand where that may come from, but like sometimes when you don't know and you engage with a community and you're also nervous because you're like, I don't want to offend anyone. My heart space is coming from love, but I just don't know and I don't want to cross a boundary. It's like, it's even harder because then it's like, well, I hate to do the white woman thing. I feel attacked.
But here's the thing. I think it's all about reframing, right? Because the way you keep framing it is, I don't want to offend. I don't want to offend. So you keep saying, I don't want to offend. Guess what you're gonna do? You're gonna offend. So instead of framing it like, I don't want to offend. I'm so nervous. Frame it like, I want to affirm. I need to figure out what does it mean for me to affirm folks, right? So you having this conversation with me. So the things we're going to talk about. So now you know better. You do better. And you continue to have these conversations, and you continue to educate yourself. You continue to make friends and community of people of trans experience so that you know better and allow them to check you on your shit. You get better. You know what I'm saying? But reframing it as I want to affirm, not I don't want to offend. Because when you frame it like that, again, this is us centering ourselves in somebody else's narrative.
Can we also touch on the racism that exists within the LGBTQ plus community that oftentimes is it addressed? Because what I've seen is that you'll have the community where you'll have white people, like you mentioned earlier, you can have a Caitlyn Jenner, but that Caitlyn Jenner doesn't stop from potentially being a part of white supremacy. Are there things that are, or conversations that are happening within the community to address the supremacy that is also existing?
Yes. Oh my God, all the time. All the time, we're addressing all the time. You know, I've been an advocate in the LGBTQ community for the better part, almost 15 years now. And as Black advocates, we not only are we having to address like homophobia, transphobia in our families and in our churches, we also have to address the racism within community, you know, the systemic and organizational racism that happens when all the money is going towards letting these gay white men get married instead of the money going towards our Black and brown babies that are out here in the streets, because, you know, 40% of all homeless youth are LGBT. Right? And the vast majority of them are Black and brown kids, right? But when we were talking about marriage equality, all these LGBT organizations, all these advocacy groups, all they were looking at was marriage equality and not looking at equity. So we had to deal with that. We had to have conversations about how Black trans women and the lives of Black trans men have been ignored. You know, resources haven't gone towards us advocacy. And we're just seeing, right now, the tide is shifting within the LGBT community. You are seeing a lot more of Black and trans voices at the center. We're seeing a lot more allyship coming out of our white brothers and sisters in the LGBT community who actually, you know, are ready to let go of their guilt and stand with us in solidarity and make sure that they start centering the voices of Black people, particularly Black trans people, who are really at the heart of creating this movement of the LGBT movement. So there's definitely work being done inter-community all the time. It's consistent. It's, you know, because white folks are going to white wherever they're at, whether they are LGBT whites or whether they are the straight whites, the police whites, president whites. Whites are going to white.
That's a shirt. That's a shirt.
So,
That's a shirt, right?
hey, they're going to do what they do. So yeah.
You know, as we begin to close out here, Tiq, I thank you because, you know, I appreciate your honesty, but then also, you know, like you mentioned, just so many good points that you've had. Is there anything that you'd want to touch on to let people know, provide information, ways that even within ourselves, because as you mentioned, you got, you know, you're fighting sometimes a double battle, like you said. You're fighting at home within your own community of Black and brown folks, but then you're fighting against white supremacy. And that's a hard battle when, you know, one thing that you should have is not have to fight that at home. So are there ways and resources and information and things that we can continue to do as allies within the community of Black and brown people, and just any other information that you feel like people should know about, people should care about?
Yeah. Well, you know, I say this. I say, you know, you have to start where you are and do what you can with what you got. So sometimes that means maybe to start in your families. I'm going to assume that you have a Black audience. I'm assuming.
Ain't a lot of white people.
A lot of white folks.
Randomly.
But typically I talk to mostly Black people. So for Black folks, you got, I know we all got that gay uncle or that butch auntie or, you know, that cousin whose gender sometimes switches up, that, you know, make you know, people act awkward at Thanksgiving, you know. Okay, be there for them, be their ally, protect them, talk to them, love them, right? Listen to their stories. Protect them from other people. Even if you don't understand it, let them know that you love them. That can save people's lives. It's the smallest things that has the biggest impact. And sometimes showing how you love someone can show up in the smallest ways, and you don't know, because you can be saving that little baby cousin's life, or that little sad uncle that don't nobody talk to because he's so gay. You know what I'm saying? Like, for real. Like, that's real. So start in your families. If you have some resources, donate some money to some Black LGBT organizations, the Black trans organizations. Google it. Find it. Google is your friend. See what's up with that, right? If you are in a position of decision-making at your jobs, you know, make sure that whatever your hiring criteria looks like and whatever your interviewing looks like, that it is something that looks equitable, and that's something, and that you're pushing to have a diversity of people in your organization or in your corporation, you know, and stand up for LGBT folks in your church. Just use your voice. Don't be scared. We've been doing it. Now it's your turn.
Touché.
Dr. T, what say you in terms of, you know, how we continue to show up from a mental health standpoint?
I'm gonna end today with this, lifting up something that Tiq said, because it's something that I have been working on for a couple of years in a variety of areas in my own life, and that's embrace the and. We oftentimes as Black people feel like we have to be something, and we are all diverse. We are all complicated and complex, and we are all a product of multiple experiences. And so you can love someone and be confused about the choices they make, the life they're living, the job they want. You can do things, and I think if we drop the but, just eliminate it from our vocabulary, because the but sets people on a different path. They forget whatever you said at the beginning. You could give a 10-minute speech about how much you love them, but the moment you say but, that's all negated, and they just want to know what's the opposite that you're bringing up. So if we learn to embrace the and, we can then hold on to all the parts of ourselves, all the parts of the people that we love, and we can experience them in a new way, which means we can support them in a new way.
That's right. I love that. Thank you for that.
That was a good one, Dr. T. I thought she was gonna do the reframe. I was like, she always saying reframe.
Star would say you got two things today?
Two things today, as always. So first, I love what you said, Tiq, about centering and affirmation and affirming versus like worrying about being offended, you know, or offending someone else. So centering and affirming others and as they show up and how they show up in the world. So that was huge, because I'm like, oh, I get that shift. And so my second and last thing is just, you know, the whole piece about, you know, you never know who you can protect, who you might, that just little small piece of, you know, standing up for people, how that may save someone's life. So, you know, being that strong voice in the room, if you see something, say something, and stand up and be a shield of protection in spaces where, you know, we like to look the other way, especially in church and family and social situations where we're like, you know, it ain't my business. No, it's my business. We all family.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. You took my affirm one, because I think that's so huge. You know, I've never thought of that. Is it, you know, why does it have to be offend rather than affirm? And so I think I would just close out in saying, you know, even the term awkward, like why does it have to feel awkward? And is that awkwardness based upon someone's own projection rather than what it is, you know? So, you know, going back to Tiq's point of just simplifying things that don't necessarily have to be complicated, because as you mentioned, if you would talk to anybody else, why does it differ in the conversation that you may have because of something that you might not know or even understand, because it's not necessarily your place. And, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. Let's make it simple. We don't have to overcomplicate it. Let's continue to affirm and show love. And I just want to continue to push the narrative of it in being inclusive within our own community, because one thing that supremacy has been designed to do, and that's to create a divide. And so, you know, and we don't have the time to be divided in any capacity between us. And so we all have to make sure that we're showing up for each other and that we're loving each other in spite of and not a but. So I appreciate you, Tiq. Thank you so much. This has definitely been an enlightening conversation. That's why you was on TED Talk, because, you know, you that dude.
You know, that's my thing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. We honor you, we appreciate it, and we out.